I'm Ashley Mitchell, 27 years old now, but I grew up hearing the same refrain, "You ruined our lives." Those words from my parents shaped my childhood, a burden they never let me forget. At 18, I finally escaped with just $247 and a backpack, determined to prove my existence wasn't a mistake. Today I own a successful small business in Seattle, but the journey here nearly broke me. Before I share how I rebuilt myself from nothing, let me know where you're watching from. Drop a like and subscribe if you've ever had to start over with almost nothing. I want to remind you it's possible to create something beautiful from broken beginnings. From the outside, our home in Portland looked picture perfect, a charming two-story colonial with neatly trimmed hedges and seasonal wreaths on the door. My parents, Karen and Michael Mitchell, were respected professionals. She was an account executive at a marketing firm, and he worked as a civil engineer. They drove matching luxury sedans, hosted dinner parties, and maintained a facade of suburban success. No one looking in would guess what happened behind our freshly painted front door. "I was on track to be vice president before you came along," my mother would say while chopping vegetables for dinner, not looking at me directly. This wasn't an occasional comment but a weekly reminder. She'd sigh deeply while showing me photos of her younger self in sleek business attire. I was going places, Ashley. Going places. My father was more passive-aggressive with his resentment. "There goes another $400, he'd mutter while writing checks for school expenses. That could have been a payment on the boat I always wanted. He kept brochures of sailboats in his desk drawer, occasionally taking them out to stare at them with longing. When I'd walk into the room, he'd look up with a pointed expression that clearly communicated, "This is what you cost me." Our living room shelves were filled with photo albums, thick volumes documenting my parents' pre-baby life. There they were backpacking through Europe, skiing in Aspen, attending glamorous parties with champagne flutes raised high. Mom in beautiful dresses, Dad looking carefree and in love. The photos stopped abruptly around the time of my mother's pregnancy, resuming sparsely after with forced smiles and tired eyes. They showed me these albums often, turning pages with nostalgic sighs, as if to say, "See what we lost because of you?" I remember my first day of kindergarten vividly. My mother had dressed me carefully, not out of excitement for my milestone but because we need to make a good impression. As we waited in the classroom, I heard her speaking to another mother. Life was perfect before her, she said in a hushed voice that wasn't quite hushed enough. We had plans, travel, career advancement, a summer home. Then the positive pregnancy test. Everything changed. The other mother looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting to me. I pretended to be engrossed in a picture book, but inside, something was hardening. Even at 5, I understood I was an unwanted disruption to their perfect lives. I learned quickly to make myself invisible. I became a ghost in my own home, moving quietly, taking up minimal space, asking for nothing. I excelled academically, straight A's from first grade onward, not from a love of learning but from desperation to justify my existence. See? I'm not just a burden. I have value. By 8 years old, I was completely self-sufficient. I made my own breakfast and packed my own lunches. I did my laundry standing on a step stool to reach the washing machine controls. I learned to read my parents' moods with the precision of a meteorologist, tiny shifts in expression that forecast emotional storms. When my father's jaw tightened in that specific way, I knew to disappear to my room. When my mother tapped her fingernails rapidly on the countertop, I knew not to ask for anything, not help with homework, not a drive to a friend's house, certainly not affection. The only true warmth in my childhood came from my grandmother Grace, my father's mother, who visited from Florida twice a year. She seemed puzzled by the dynamics in our house, often watching interactions with furrowed brows. "Come help me bake cookies, sweetheart," she'd say, creating excuses to get me alone in the kitchen. During these baking sessions, she'd ask about school, friends, my thoughts, and dreams. Simple conversations that felt foreign and wonderful. She hugged me spontaneously, affection without agenda. Once, when I accidentally spilled flour all over the counter, I froze in terror. At home, mistakes meant cold silence or cutting remarks. but Grandma Grace just laughed. That's why they make paper towels, honey. No harm done. The contrast between her genuine love and my parents' coldness was stark and confusing. If Grandma Grace could love me so easily, what was wrong with me that my own parents couldn't? This question haunted me throughout my childhood, becoming a splinter in my developing sense of self, painful and impossible to remove. One night when I was 11, I overheard my parents arguing after they thought I was asleep. "We could have had it all, Michael," my mother hissed. "Look at Jennifer and David, they waited to have kids. She just made partner and they're building that vacation house in Bend. What do you want me to say, Karen? We made our choice. We didn't choose this. The condom broke, and you know how I felt about abortion. Lower your voice, for God's sake." Why? She should know she wasn't wanted. Maybe then she'd be grateful for everything we've sacrificed. I pressed my hands against my ears and curled into a ball under my blankets. But even with my ears covered, I could still hear the truth echoing, "Not wanted, not wanted, not wanted." The next morning at breakfast, my mother looked at me oddly. "Your eyes are puffy. Were you crying?" For a brief moment, I thought she might show concern, that maternal instinct might finally kick in after 11 years. Instead, she sighed. "Well, whatever it is, buck up. Nobody likes a winner, Ashley. God knows I've had plenty of reasons to cry, but you don't see me falling apart." I nodded and finished my cereal in silence, understanding completely what she was really saying. Your pain is insignificant compared to the suffering I've endured because of you. Middle school brought a new dimension to my home situation. As puberty hit and normal teenage emotions emerged, my parents' verbal abuse intensified. Normal adolescent moods were met with eye rolls and comments like, "Oh great, another thing to deal with," or "as if you haven't complicated our lives enough already." The school library became my sanctuary. Open early and closing late, it offered warm refuge from both Maine winters and the emotional coldness of home. The head librarian, Ms. Reynolds, noticed my daily presence. "Most kids can't wait to leave school, but you're always first in and last out," she observed one day, not unkindly. Something about her gentle manner broke through my carefully constructed walls. I found myself confiding small truths, nothing about the emotional abuse, but adjacent realities like always making my own meals and never having parents attend school functions. Ms. Reynolds began saving interesting books for me, occasionally leaving granola bars or fruit with notes saying, "Brain food for my favorite reader." These small kindnesses were like water on parched soil. Despite my attempts to remain invisible at school as well as home, I somehow attracted the friendship of Lily Parker in 7th grade English class. Lily was everything I wasn't: confident, outspoken, from a boisterous family of 6 who actually seemed to enjoy each other's company. "You're coming over Friday," she announced one day, not a question but a statement. "I can't," I said automatically, the reflex of a child who knows asking permission means inviting rejection. "Did you ask your parents?" "I don't need to. The answer will be no." Lily stared at me with surprising insight. "Then don't ask. Just tell them you're doing a school project." This minor act of rebellion, my first, opened a door I hadn't known existed. Lily's home was a revelation. Her parents asked us about our day and actually listened to the answers. They touched their children casually, affectionately, a hand on a shoulder, a quick hug in passing. At dinner, everyone talked over each other, laughed loudly, argued without malice. The contrast to my silent, tension-filled meals was staggering. Mrs. Parker noticed me watching this family dynamic with wide eyes. "You're welcome here anytime, Ashley," she said warmly. "Any friend of Lily's is part of the family." I nearly cried at her words. Part of a family. What a foreign, beautiful concept. When I turned 15, I secured a job at Cornerstone Books, a local bookstore that overlooked my age thanks to my responsibility and extensive reading knowledge. Every dollar I earned went into a secret account that Ms. Reynolds helped me open, a financial escape hatch I was already planning to use, though the specific exit strategy remained nebulous. At home, I maintained perfect grades, perfect behavior, and perfect invisibility. I developed a persona so bland and compliant that I sometimes wondered if I existed at all when not being observed by others. My achievements, honor roll, debate team captain, perfect SAT scores, were met with shrugs or comments about how I should be grateful for the genetic intelligence they gave me. The summer before my senior year, I overheard a conversation that crystallized everything. My parents were sitting on the back deck, unaware I was reading in the nearby hammock, obscured by the oak tree's thick summer foliage. "She'll be gone next year," my father said, sounding more animated than I'd heard him in years. "We can finally sell this place, downsize to that condo downtown we've been eyeing." "God, yes," my mother agreed. "No more pretending to care about high school drama or college applications. We've done our duty," he continued. 18 years raising someone else's dream child. Now we get our lives back. "I've been looking at river cruises in Europe," she said excitedly. "Once we sell this place, we'll have enough for that and a decent condo. Finally be free of the mistake that cost us everything." I lay frozen in the hammock, barely breathing. The college fund they occasionally mentioned as a major sacrifice, it didn't exist. They were planning to sell our house as soon as I graduated and use the money for themselves. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, yet somehow this final confirmation of my status as temporary burden still had the power to wound. 2 weeks later, on my 18th birthday, neither parent mentioned the date. I came downstairs to find them eating breakfast as usual, discussing a colleague's promotion. No card, no acknowledgement. I stood in the doorway for a full minute, giving them every opportunity to recognize the day, before quietly making my own toast. That evening, alone in my room, I made my decision. I wouldn't wait to be thrown out. I would leave on my terms, disappearing from their lives as they so clearly wished I would. The path forward was suddenly clear. I needed to escape before they could discard me. Once my decision was made, I approached it with the same meticulous care I'd applied to academics. This wasn't just running away, this was strategic relocation. I maintained my usual routine, giving no hint of my intentions while researching affordable cities with employment opportunities and educational options. Seattle emerged as my destination of choice, far enough away to prevent accidental encounters, large enough to offer anonymity, with a decent public transportation system and community college options. Through an online forum for college students, I connected with potential roommates, 3 other girls sharing a 2-bedroom apartment, looking for a 4th to reduce costs further. The logistics were daunting. I needed to secure my essential documents without raising suspicions. Over several weeks, I carefully collected my birth certificate from the filing cabinet in my father's office, made a copy of my social security card from their tax records, and gathered my immunization records during a routine cleaning session. I applied to North Seattle Community College, securing a partial scholarship based on my academic record. I created detailed budget spreadsheets for various income scenarios, calculating exactly how much I would need for rent, food, transportation, and tuition. The numbers were tight, brutally so, but theoretically possible. To bolster my escape fund, I began selling possessions discreetly online, books I'd already read, clothes I rarely wore, the expensive graphing calculator my parents had begrudgingly purchased for advanced math classes. Each sale was a small victory, another step toward freedom. Despite the clear evidence of their indifference, I struggled emotionally with the finality of my plan. 18 years of conditioning had left me believing I owed them something, gratitude, perhaps, for the basic necessities they'd provided while resenting every bite of food I consumed, every inch I grew, every dollar I cost. One afternoon in early spring, I sought out Ms. Reynolds in the library. "I'm leaving after graduation," I told her quietly. "Not for college. Just leaving. Starting over somewhere new." She studied me carefully before responding. "Do your parents know?" I shook my head. "Are you in danger at home, Ashley?" "Because there are resources." "Not physical danger," I clarified. "They've never hit me. They've just never wanted me either." She nodded slowly, seeming to understand the unsaid. "Do you have a plan?" I outlined my Seattle strategy, watching relief gradually replace concern on her face as she recognized the thoroughness of my preparations. "You know you can list me as a reference for jobs or apartments," she offered. "And I can receive mail for you, forwarded on if needed." I hadn't expected this practical support, and it momentarily overwhelmed me. "Thank you," I managed, blinking back tears. Lily was harder to tell. Unlike Ms. Reynolds, she'd never fully grasped the toxicity of my home life, despite glimpsing portions of it. "But why not just go to Portland State and live in the dorms like we talked about?" she asked, confused by my sudden change in plans. How could I explain that staying in the same city as my parents would mean never truly escaping? That I needed complete severance, not just physical distance? "I need a fresh start," I said instead. "Somewhere I'm not defined by who I've been." She didn't understand, how could she, with her loving family, but she accepted, making me promise to stay in touch and visit. 2 weeks before my planned departure, my grandmother Grace called for one of our regular chats. Something in my voice must have alerted her. "Ashley, what's happening?" she asked directly. "You sound different." I hadn't planned to tell her, she was my father's mother, after all, but suddenly the truth spilled out. Not everything, but enough. I was leaving after graduation, starting fresh in Seattle. My parents wouldn't miss me. There was a long silence before she spoke. "I've suspected things weren't right for years. Your father, he and your mother have always been focused on themselves. I should have done more. You were the only one who showed me real love," I told her truthfully. Another pause. "I want to help you, but I won't insult you by suggesting you stay where you're not valued. Can I send something to your Ms. Reynolds for you?" A week later, a small package arrived for me at the library. Inside was my grandmother's engagement ring and an envelope containing $1,000 in cash with a note. "This was meant for your wedding someday, but starting your new life seems more important now. This doesn't come with strings. It comes with love. Call me when you're settled." The money transformed my tight budget into something more workable, providing a small cushion against emergencies. The ring provided something perhaps more valuable, tangible proof that someone in my bloodline had truly loved me. As graduation approached, I pared down my possessions to what would fit in my backpack. Clothes, toiletries, important documents, my laptop, the few photos I had of Grandma Grace, Lily, and Ms. Reynolds. Everything else I donated, sold, or simply left behind. On my final night, I wrote a brief note to my parents: "I'm setting you free from your mistake. Don't worry about contacting me. Ashley." I placed it on my perfectly made bed, taking one last look at the room that had never really been a sanctuary. The walls were still the pale blue they'd been painted before my birth, never updated to reflect my growing personality. No posters had been allowed, no pushpin holes in the walls permitted. It looked like it could be cleared out in minutes, with no evidence a child had grown up within these walls. I slipped out at dawn, when the June sun was just breaking over the horizon. The symbolism wasn't lost on me: darkness behind, light ahead. I took one last look at the house that had never been a home, then turned away, walking the 3 miles to the bus station with 18 years of emotional baggage but only one physical bag to my name. As the bus pulled away from Portland, I pressed my forehead against the cool window glass, watching my past recede into the distance. Terror and hope battled within me: terror of the unknown future, hope that somewhere in Seattle, I might finally find what had always eluded me, a sense of belonging, of mattering, of being wanted. Seattle in June was nothing like the travel websites had portrayed. Instead of sparkling water and mountain views, my first impression was of overwhelming gray skies, gray buildings, gray faces of hurried strangers who didn't notice the terrified 18-year-old clutching a backpack like a life preserver. The apartment I'd arranged sight unseen was in a rundown building in the Northgate area. For girls sharing a 2-bedroom meant I was actually renting 1/4 of a bedroom, a twin mattress in the corner and a single plastic storage bin for my possessions. My roommates, Jess, Taylor, and Madison, were community college students or recent graduates, all working multiple jobs. They were civil but distant, each too consumed with their own survival to form fast friendships. That first night, lying on my mattress on the floor with unfamiliar street sounds filtering through thin windows, reality crashed down. What had I done? I had no safety net, no backup plan, no one to call if things went sideways. For the first time since making my decision, doubt crept in, whispering that perhaps enduring my parents' indifference would have been smarter than this terrifying freedom. I allowed myself exactly 1 hour of panic and tears before forcing practical action. The next morning, I walked the neighborhood systematically, inquiring about employment at every business. By the third day, I had secured a job at Rainy Day Cafe, a local coffee shop paying minimum wage plus tips. The manager, Diane, hired me on the spot after I demonstrated I could count change accurately and promised I was a fast learner. "You seem desperate," she observed bluntly. But not desperate in a problematic way. Desperate in a will actually show up for 5 a.m. shifts way. That works for me. With employment secured, I focused on my community college orientation. North Seattle Community College wasn't impressive by conventional standards, with its utilitarian buildings and diverse, non-traditional student body. But to me, it represented possibility, a stepping stone to a future where my worth wasn't measured by the inconvenience of my existence. I created a strict schedule that maximized every minute, studying from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m., classes from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., work from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., with brief windows for eating and showering. Sleep became a luxury afforded only 5 hours nightly. The physical toll was immediate. I lost 10 pounds from my already slim frame in the first month, developed perpetual shadows under my eyes, caught every minor cold circulating. Financially, I lived in a state of constant mathematics. Rent, $375. Utilities, approximately $50. Phone, $40. Transportation, $80 in bus passes. Food, limited to $200 monthly, requiring careful meal planning based on sales and discount stores. Every purchase was calculated, every extra penny saved. Despite my planning, unexpected costs emerged like landmines. Textbooks cost far more than anticipated. My glasses broke during a shift at the cafe, requiring replacement I couldn't afford but couldn't function without. The apartment's refrigerator died mid-July, spoiling the carefully budgeted groceries I'd purchased. Roommate dynamics added another layer of stress. Taylor's boyfriend practically lived with us without contributing to rent or utilities. Madison worked night shifts and practiced guitar during daylight hours when I needed to sleep. Jess was kind but had a revolving door of friends who treated the apartment as a weekend crash pad. By November, winter darkness descended on Seattle, bringing constant rain and early sunsets. The holiday season arrived with cheerful decorations that felt like personal affronts. This would be my first Christmas completely alone, with no family, however dysfunctional, to mark the occasion. I picked up extra shifts at the cafe, telling myself it was for the money but knowing it was really to avoid the emptiness of the apartment. On Christmas Day, the cafe closed early, sending employees home at noon. I wandered downtown Seattle alone, watching happy families through restaurant windows, couples holding hands, friends gathering for celebration. Standing on the waterfront with cold wind whipping my inadequate jacket, I hit emotional rock bottom. What was the point of all this struggle? I had escaped my parents' indifference only to find myself in a city equally indifferent to my existence. I was working myself to exhaustion just to survive, with no joy, no connections, no purpose beyond basic survival. For one dark moment, I contemplated the cold waters of Puget Sound before me. How easy it would be to simply stop fighting, to let the water wash away the struggle and pain. The thought terrified me enough to step back, fumbling for my phone with numb fingers. I called the only person who had ever made me feel truly valued, Grandma Grace. "Ashley?" Her voice was surprised but warm. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." "Merry Christmas," I managed before my voice broke. "I'm sorry to bother you on the holiday." "Nonsense. I've been hoping you'd call." "Are you all right?" "You don't sound all right." The genuine concern in her voice cracked my carefully maintained composure. I told her everything, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the crushing doubt that I'd made a terrible mistake. She listened without interruption until I had emptied myself of words. First things first, she said firmly. You did not make a mistake by leaving. That environment was slowly killing your spirit. Second, the first year of any major life change is the hardest. You're in the trenches right now, but it won't always be this way. How do you know? I asked, sounding younger than my 18 years. Because I've lived long enough to know that nothing, good or bad, stays the same forever. This is your winter, Ashley. Spring always follows winter. As we talked, she casually mentioned she'd called my parents' house at Thanksgiving, hoping to speak to me. Your mother told me you'd run off with some boyfriend. Said you left a note saying not to contact you. The lie shouldn't have surprised me, yet somehow it did. They couldn't even acknowledge the truth to family. There's no boyfriend, I said. There's never been a boyfriend. I know, Grandma Grace replied simply. I know you, Ashley. You're not impulsive or irresponsible. Whatever drove you to leave must have been building for years. That phone call became my turning point. As I walked back to my apartment through streets glittering with Christmas lights, I made a decision. I could surrender to despair, or I could fight harder for the life I deserved. My parents might have considered me a mistake, but I refused to make their assessment my reality. The next day, I applied for a tutoring position at the college writing center, a job that paid better than the cafe and would look good on future resumes. I reorganized my schedule to include 1 hour daily for self-care, even if that just meant reading for pleasure or taking a longer shower. I joined a free student support group for first-generation college students, finding solidarity among others navigating education without family support. These weren't dramatic changes, but they were deliberate ones. I was choosing to build a life, not just survive each day. The darkness didn't disappear overnight, but a tiny flame of possibility had been kindled, and I protected it fiercely. By the end of my first year in Seattle, I had accumulated enough small victories to create momentum. My exceptional grades at community college earned me a transfer scholarship to the University of Washington's Foster School of Business. The modest scholarship wouldn't cover everything, but combined with increased student loans and my savings from the writing center job, it made university attendance possible. With slightly improved finances, I was able to move to a better living situation, a 2-bedroom apartment shared with just one roommate, Jessica, whom I'd met through the writing center. The apartment was still in an older building with outdated appliances, but having actual bedroom walls and a roommate whose company I enjoyed felt luxurious compared to my first Seattle home. I can't believe you survived that first apartment, Jessica commented as we unpacked our meager belongings. 4 people in 2 bedrooms sounds like a psychological experiment, not housing. When you don't have other options, you make it work, I replied, arranging my few books on a second-hand shelf we'd found on a curb. That's what I like about you, Ashley. You're like, pathologically resilient. I laughed, but her words stayed with me. Resilience had never felt like a choice, it was simple survival. But perhaps survival itself was a form of resistance against those who deemed you unworthy of thriving. At university, I discovered something unexpected. I had an actual talent for business concepts. The organizational skills I developed to navigate my childhood served me well in classes on management and marketing. My ability to read people's motivations and anticipate needs, honed through years of predicting my parents' moods, translated effectively to understanding consumer behavior and market trends. Professor Wilson, who taught my introduction to entrepreneurship class, became an unlikely mentor after I submitted a particularly insightful analysis of a failing business case study. Most students identify the obvious problems, she told me during office hours. You found the hidden ones, the cultural and interpersonal dysfunctions that were sinking the company. That's rare in undergraduates. With her encouragement, I began developing a side hustle creating business plans for local entrepreneurs, mostly immigrant business owners and artists who had practical skills but needed help with formal planning documents for loan applications. I charged modest fees, building both my portfolio and my emergency savings fund. For the first time, I allowed myself to form genuine friendships with classmates and coworkers. This wasn't easy. Years of keeping people at arm's length had left me with rusty social skills and deep-seated trust issues. But gradually, I built a small circle of friends who knew pieces of my story and didn't judge me for my family situation. During my second year at university, I finally accepted my academic advisor's repeated suggestions to visit the campus counseling center. The prospect of intentionally discussing my parents terrified me, but the persistent nightmares and anxiety attacks couldn't be ignored forever. Dr. Levine, my assigned therapist, specialized in family trauma. In our first session, I downplayed my experiences, using euphemisms like difficult childhood and complicated relationship. "Ashley," she interrupted gently, "what you're describing is emotional abuse and neglect." I physically recoiled at the words. That seems dramatic. They provided food, shelter, education. Meeting only physical needs while systematically destroying a child's sense of worth is still abuse. Children need more than survival necessities. They need to feel wanted, valued, and loved. Her validation opened floodgates I'd kept tightly sealed. Over months of weekly sessions, I unpacked the damage of being constantly told I was a burden, a mistake, a life ruiner. I confronted the shame I carried, the deep-seated belief that I was fundamentally unworthy of love. The breakthrough came during a session in my third year of therapy. "I've been thinking about something," I told Dr. Levine. "If a friend told me their parents treated them the way mine treated me, I'd be horrified. I'd tell them they deserved better. Why can't I believe that about myself?" "That's an excellent question," she replied. "Why can't you?" I sat with the question, really considering it. Because if I believe I deserved better, then I have to accept that my parents failed me completely. Not just made mistakes, but fundamentally failed at the most basic aspect of parenting, loving their child. And what happens if you accept that? Then I have to grieve the parents I never had and never will have, I whispered. And that feels unbearable. Yet here you are, bearing it, she observed quietly. You've been bearing it your whole life. That session marked a turning point in my healing. I began the painful work of grieving, not just for my past, but for the loving family I would never have. I allowed myself to feel the full magnitude of what had been taken from me, and in doing so, began to truly understand, I deserved better. The fault lay with them, not with me. As this internal work progressed, my external life continued to improve. I was promoted to head tutor at the writing center. My business plan side hustle gained reputation through word of mouth. I maintained a 3.9 GPA while working nearly full-time. For my 21st birthday, a date that had always passed unacknowledged in my family, my friends threw me a surprise party, complete with a homemade cake and thoughtful gifts. Looking around at their smiling faces, I realized I had created something precious, chosen family. People who celebrated my existence rather than resenting it. That summer, I allowed myself a luxury that would have been unthinkable before, a weekend trip to the Oregon coast with Jessica and 2 other friends. It wasn't an extravagant vacation, we stayed in a budget motel and cooked most meals in the kitchenette, but those 3 days of beach walks, late-night conversations, and genuine laughter felt like a different kind of wealth. Standing on the beach at sunset, watching waves crash against ancient rocks, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. The ocean had existed long before my parents' disappointment and would continue long after. My pain, while real, was just one small part of a vast, continuing world. Somehow, this thought was comforting rather than diminishing. University graduation arrived in June, almost exactly 4 years after my escape from Portland. As I sat among fellow graduates in cap and gown, I scanned the audience out of habit, knowing there would be no family members searching for me in return. Instead, I found Jessica, Professor Wilson, and Dr. Levine, who had closed her schedule to attend. They cheered loudly when my name was called, waving a handmade sign, "Congratulations, Ashley." Walking across the stage to receive my diploma, I felt a sudden clarity. I had done this. Despite every obstacle, every discouraging word, every financial struggle, I had earned this moment through sheer determination and work. No one could take this accomplishment from me because no one had given it to me. I had built it myself. After the ceremony, Professor Wilson handed me an envelope. "This isn't a gift," she clarified. "It's an investment in a promising business mind." Inside was a list of business contacts, former students, colleagues, and industry connections, along with a handwritten note: "These people are expecting your call. Don't disappoint me." I clutched the envelope, recognizing its value far beyond any material gift. "I won't," I promised. That night, celebrating with friends at a local restaurant, I realized how far I had come from the terrified 18-year-old who had arrived in Seattle with nothing but determination and wounds. I still carried scars, probably always would, but they no longer defined me. I had built an identity beyond unwanted daughter. I was Ashley Mitchell, business graduate, future entrepreneur, loyal friend, survivor. With diploma in hand and Professor Wilson's contacts list as a starting point, I secured a position at Brightpoint Marketing, a mid-sized firm specializing in campaign strategy for small businesses. The starting salary wasn't impressive, but the position offered something more valuable than immediate financial reward: insight into the inner workings of multiple business types and direct contact with owners and decision-makers. From day one, I approached the job strategically. While my colleagues saw client meetings as routine work obligations, I viewed each as a master class in business operations. I volunteered for diverse accounts, absorbing everything from the cash flow challenges of family restaurants to the scaling issues of tech startups. Evenings and weekends were dedicated to developing my own business plan, refining it with each new insight gained. 6 months into my time at Brightpoint, I was assigned to work with Ryan Donovan, founder of a successful chain of independent bookstores. Unlike many clients who treated junior staff as invisible, Ryan sought my opinions directly and listened attentively to my suggestions. "You think differently," he observed during our third meeting. "Most marketers focus on what's trendy. You focus on what's sustainable." His comment validated the approach I'd been developing, one that emphasized long-term business health over flashy but temporary growth spikes. We began meeting for coffee outside official sessions, conversations evolving from his specific marketing needs to broader business philosophy. "What's your 5-year plan, Ashley?" he asked during one such meeting. I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm working here to learn everything I can about different business models and challenges. I'm saving aggressively. In 2 to 3 years, I plan to launch my own business consulting firm focused on helping small businesses and startups that don't have access to high-end consulting services." Instead of the polite dismissal I expected, Ryan leaned forward, interested. "That's a genuine market gap. Small businesses need strategic guidance but can rarely afford the big consulting firms. Tell me more about your approach." That conversation marked the beginning of an informal mentorship that would prove invaluable. Ryan had navigated exactly the path I aspired to, building something substantial from minimal starting resources. For 2 years, I lived well below my means, maintaining the frugal habits developed during my early Seattle days despite my gradually improving salary. I rented my first solo apartment, a tiny studio in an older building, but with my name alone on the lease. The freedom of having my own space, however small, felt like an extraordinary luxury after years of shared living. Every month, I increased my business startup fund, watching it grow with a sense of quiet pride. I created detailed plans, researched competitors, developed service packages and pricing models, and built a basic website. On weekends, I took pro bono clients, friends of friends with small business ideas, to refine my consulting approach and build a portfolio of success stories. Then, unexpectedly, my path accelerated. My grandmother Grace passed away peacefully in her sleep at 84. The news reached me via a brief, formal email from my father, the first direct contact since my departure 6 years earlier. The message contained funeral details and a note that Grace had named me in her will. The inheritance wasn't large by conventional standards. $40,000 and her modest collection of jewelry, but to me, it represented both her enduring love and the seed money that could launch my business years ahead of schedule. After allowing myself appropriate time to grieve, I made the decision, it was time to build. I gave notice at Brightpoint, registered my business, Mitchell Consulting Group, and rented a tiny office space in a shared work environment. My business cards arrived in a plain brown box that I opened with trembling hands. Seeing my name followed by founder and principal consultant felt surreal, a concrete manifestation of a dream that had sustained me through countless difficult days. The first year of entrepreneurship tested every skill and ounce of resilience I possessed. Despite meticulous planning, unexpected challenges emerged weekly. Cash flow fluctuated wildly. Clients demanded services outside my initial offerings. Marketing required constant adjustment to find effective channels. Ryan's mentorship proved invaluable during this period. He reviewed contracts, suggested pricing adjustments, and most importantly, normalized the struggles. Every successful business looks inevitable in retrospect, he told me during a particularly difficult month. While you're in it, it's just problem-solving day after day, wondering if you're crazy for trying. Gradually, Mitchell Consulting found its footing and distinctive approach. I specialized in helping underdog businesses, those started by immigrants, former foster youth, domestic violence survivors, and others who had overcome significant obstacles. My personal experience navigating systems without family support gave me unique insight into their challenges. I developed a sliding scale fee structure that made services accessible while still maintaining business viability. My big break came unexpectedly in my second year of operation. A client, a refugee from Syria who had built a successful catering business, was featured in a Seattle business publication. When asked how she had navigated American business regulations and growth challenges, she credited Mitchell Consulting, leading to a sidebar profile of my firm and approach. The publicity brought a wave of new clients and allowed me to hire my first employee, Jessica, my former roommate who had recently completed her MBA. Having outgrown the shared workspace, we moved to a small but proper office with our names on the door. On the 5th anniversary of my departure from Portland, I took a personal day for reflection. Sitting in a park overlooking Puget Sound, I reviewed the distance traveled, from unwanted child to successful business owner, from believing I was worthless to knowing my value, from isolation to community. That evening, I received an email that momentarily stopped my breath. The sender, Karen Mitchell. Subject line, need to talk. The message was brief. Ashley, your father and I are facing some financial difficulties due to medical bills and poor investments. We know you have your own business now. We'd like to discuss possible assistance. Let us know when you're available to talk. No apology. No acknowledgement of years of silence. No recognition of the pain they'd caused. Just a straightforward request for money, as if I owed them something after years of being told I had ruined their lives. I spent a week processing the email, discussing it with Dr. Levine and close friends. The consensus was clear, I owed them nothing. Yet still, some part of me, perhaps the child who had desperately wanted parental approval, felt pulled to respond. After careful consideration, I replied with a neutral message agreeing to meet at a public location during my next trip to Portland for a business conference. I didn't promise financial help, only conversation. It would be my first time seeing them in 7 years. The cafe I chose for our meeting was in downtown Portland, neutral territory filled with the background noise of espresso machines and lunchtime conversations. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table with clear sightlines to the entrance. At 35 minutes past the hour, they finally appeared, older versions of the parents I remembered, my father's hair now fully gray, my mother's face lined in ways that spoke of stress rather than laughter. They hesitated upon seeing me, perhaps surprised by the poised, professional woman who bore little resemblance to the frightened girl who had slipped away 7 years earlier. I didn't stand to embrace them. Instead, I gestured to the empty chairs across from me, maintaining the emotional and physical distance I needed. Ashley, my mother began awkwardly. You look, well. Thank you, I replied simply. I am well. An uncomfortable silence followed until my father cleared his throat. We appreciated you agreeing to meet. It's been a long time. The understatement was almost laughable. 7 years, 2 months, I confirmed. Since I left a note on my bed and you didn't bother looking for me. My directness clearly unsettled them. They had expected the compliant daughter who had worked so hard to avoid causing waves. That version of Ashley no longer existed. About that, my mother said, fidgeting with her napkin. You were always so independent. We assumed you had plans, were handling things on your own. The attempt to reframe their complete abandonment as respect for my independence was breathtaking in its dishonesty. I could have called them out, created a scene, listed every cutting remark and cold shoulder that had driven me away. Instead, I simply stated, we both know that's not true. But I didn't agree to meet to discuss the past. Relief flashed across their faces at the perceived escape from accountability. As we mentioned in our email, we've had some setbacks, my father explained, outlining medical expenses from my mother's knee replacement and investments that had underperformed. We're not asking for a handout, just some temporary assistance until we can sell the house and downsize. I listened without interrupting, noting the familiar patterns. Still centered entirely on their needs. Still expecting others to solve their problems. Still seeing me as a resource rather than a person. I'd built a successful business, I said when he finished. But I did it without any support from either of you. I worked multiple jobs, took out student loans, and sacrificed for years to create what I have now. We're aware, my mother said with a hint of her old impatience. That's why we're approaching you. You're doing well, and we're family. The word family from her lips struck me as particularly hollow. Family, I repeated softly. You told me repeatedly that I ruined your lives. You made sure I knew I was unwanted from my earliest memories. When I left, you told Grandma Grace I ran off with a boyfriend rather than admitting your only child fled because home wasn't safe emotionally. That's not family. That's DNA coincidence. Their expressions shifted from hopeful expectation to defensive anger. We gave you everything, my father protested. A roof over your head, food, education. You provided legal minimums to avoid child services involvement, I interrupted calmly. And you made sure I knew the cost of every necessity was a burden, a sacrifice on your part. Parents are supposed to want their children to thrive, not merely exist without inconveniencing the adults. My mother's face hardened. So that's it? You're refusing to help? After everything we did for you? In that moment, looking at their entitled expressions, I felt something unexpected, pity. They would never understand the damage they had caused because they couldn't see beyond themselves. They would never experience the joy of genuine connection because they measured relationships only by utility. I'm not giving you money, I said clearly. But I can offer business advice, if you're interested. Your house should sell well in the current market. If you invest the proceeds wisely and adjust your lifestyle expectations, you should be comfortable. The meeting ended shortly afterward. As I stood to leave, I felt a strange lightness. For years, I had carried the weight of their rejection, believing it reflected my worth. Standing there as a successful adult, I could finally see the truth. Their inability to love me had everything to do with their limitations and nothing to do with mine. If you're ever willing to acknowledge the reality of my childhood and work toward an authentic relationship, you have my email, I said as my parting words. But I won't participate in a relationship based on fiction or convenience. I walked out of the cafe with shoulders straight, no longer the invisible girl trying to minimize her existence. I had spoken my truth without anger or vengeance, set clear boundaries, and walked away intact. That evening, I met Jessica and Ryan for dinner, celebrating not the difficult encounter but the personal milestone it represented. I was surrounded by people who genuinely valued me, my chosen family of friends, mentors, and colleagues who had seen my worth when my biological family couldn't. In the years that followed, I expanded Mitchell Consulting into a respected firm with 15 employees, specializing in helping unconventional entrepreneurs navigate business challenges. We opened a second office in Portland, a deliberate choice to reclaim the city that had been the site of so much pain. Particularly meaningful was the scholarship program I established for students from difficult home situations. Each year, we funded education and provided mentoring for young people who, like me, were escaping environments where they weren't valued. At 30, I purchased my first home, a modern townhouse with large windows that filled the space with light. After years of temporary living situations, the permanence of having my own walls, my own foundation, felt revolutionary. I painted each room colors of my choosing, hung art that spoke to me, created a home that reflected the person I had become rather than the pain I had escaped. My healing journey continued in expected and unexpected ways. Through continued therapy, I learned to trust and eventually to love, building a relationship with Ryan that evolved from mentorship to friendship to partnership. He understood my trust issues and background in ways few could, having navigated his own family trauma decades earlier. When we moved in together, combining our books and belongings, I found myself capable of vulnerability I once would have considered dangerous. Allowing someone to truly see me, to know my wounds and love me not despite them but as part of my complete story, was perhaps my greatest victory over the past. The parents who raised me never reached out again after our cafe meeting. I had made peace with their absence, understanding that sometimes the healthiest family trees require strategic pruning of toxic branches. Looking back on my journey from unwanted daughter to successful business owner and mentor, I realized the most important lesson wasn't about financial independence or professional achievement. It was learning that your value isn't determined by those who failed to see it. You aren't defined by how others treat you, even those who should have loved you most. Family can be chosen, cultivated through authentic connection rather than biological obligation. Success isn't just measured in business milestones or bank accounts. True success is creating a life where you are valued, where your existence is celebrated rather than tolerated, where you can extend to others the acceptance once denied to you. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that helping others is the most effective way to heal yourself. Each time I mentor a young person facing similar challenges or fund a scholarship for a student escaping a toxic home, I reclaim another piece of my own narrative. Everyone deserves to be wanted and loved. If you weren't given that gift by those who should have provided it, know this: you can build it for yourself, brick by brick, relationship by relationship. The family that matters is the one that sees your light, not the one that tried to dim it. I'd love to hear your stories of resilience in the comments below. What obstacles have you overcome? How did you rebuild after a difficult start? Your experiences might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to keep going. Please like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of overcoming adversity, and share with anyone who might need reminding that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. Remember, the people who couldn't love you were showing their limitations, not yours. Thank you for listening to my story.